Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
What's up, guys? It's Darren. Welcome to the Touch MBA podcast. Here we've recorded lots of INSEAD MBA related episodes. We've had admissions directors on the show. We've had students give their breakdown of what the experience is like real time on the show. But we've never had an applicant related episode. And so that's what this week's show will be about. I brought on Massine Bouzerar, who recently got admitted to INSEAD and will be starting the program this fall. And we just go through every part of his application journey. He shares, his best tips, his experiences, and I think you'll walk away from this episode knowing what it takes to get into a top program like INSEAD. And I just really enjoy doing these applicant breakdown type episodes, especially when they're with listeners who came to Touch MBA for free school selection help. It's always great to see that circle completed, that journey completed, at least the application part of the journey. Massine still has a whirlwind 10 months ahead of him at INSEAD to look forward to. Massine does mention some resources that he found particularly helpful that I'll be sure to link to in the show notes. Remember that every episode we do has a corresponding written write-up. Massine mentioned episode number 13, which is where I interviewed Carolyn Diarte-Edwards, the former admissions director of INSEAD. He mentioned episode 110, another interview with Carolyn I did about prepping your recommenders, and also episode 32, which was done with my best friend John Caihello about how to tell your best story. Be sure to listen to those episodes as well, those of you who are interested in INSEAD. And let's just get straight to the show. Here we go. I have a good one for you this week. We're going to talk about how to get into INSEAD and do that through a case study of a recently admitted applicant. So we're going to cover how to get into INSEAD, obviously a top-ranked school, ranked number 1 by the Financial Times for 2 straight years. How to get through a grueling application process. INSEAD is notorious for how long and their application processes. They require 7 essays, 4 video questions, alumni interviews. And we're going to also talk about how to position yourself for a big career change. Our next guest has experience with all these things, and I want to congratulate him first for getting into INSEAD. Massine Bouzerar, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Darren. It's great to be with you.
Awesome. Thank you for jumping on. So, Massine, could you give us a little bit of background? Yeah, kind of what's your background?
Sure thing. So I studied business. I did my undergrad at Brock University. After that, I worked for a few years in telecommunications within the product management space, the pricing space. And now most recently, I'm working for a Toronto startup called Ecobee, still within the product management function, but mostly focusing on digital e-commerce. So I decided to apply to INSEAD kind of at the last minute. So I did some traveling over the summer. I came back, started a new job, and immediately I knew that I was ready for business school and I was ready for a really big change. So again, I'm currently located in North America. I knew that I wanted to move out of the continent, get into Europe, maybe Africa and Asia. And it seemed like, the best possible decision at the best possible time for me.
And did you have a sort of moment where you realized, oh man, I really need to go to business school? I mean, what kind of motivated you to not only apply to business school, but think about schools outside of North America?
It's a great question. So I always go back to this one moment, actually, when I was traveling Southeast Asia. I met a consultant or an ex-consultant in Myanmar who was telling me about his experience there, where he worked in the telco space, which is very similar to my background, but he got to launch the country's first telco and make a huge impact in that sense. And I kept thinking about how, I'd love to make an impact like that. And I'd love to take all the skills that I have here in Canada in the telco space or more broadly speaking, in the tech space and have a positive impact on people. Walking around Myanmar, I saw everyone with a cell phone and I saw the big transformation it had on their lives. So I kept going back to that moment when I got back to Canada and I said, why do I keep waiting? Why do I always think that big change will happen for me? So that was the moment that made me think that was the time for an MBA. I knew an MBA was going to be in the horizon. I'm 25 years old, so
you're so young. Oh my gosh!
Yeah, everyone says that when I tell them. So I did apply. I did apply earlier than I initially thought, and hence why I had to write the GMAT this summer as well.
Yes.
But yeah, that was the moment I went back to, and I decided to just study a ton, work hard, and get through the application process.
Yeah, we'll get to the GMAT in a second, but as a relatively younger candidate, I believe you have about 4 years of work experience, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Right, and you've progressed. I mean, you've grown from being a product analyst to a product manager to a senior product manager to now a manager of e-commerce at Ecobee, where you are now. I mean, you have really shown a lot of career progression. And did you feel like that was a risk? You're progressing really well in your career and then you're going to stop all that to go to business school. Like, did you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I definitely thought about it. I know that even within my last employer at TELUS and now at Ecobee, I knew that my future was bright there if I wanted to spend more time there. But again, I kept going back to my long-term goals. I know my long-term goals aren't aligned with working in the North American space. And sure, I could keep putting them off just to get another promotion, get another raise, and get more responsibilities. But I think, that this recent travel experience I had, the people that I met, really created that sense of urgency and pushed me to apply to business school.
And how did you go about looking for which schools to apply to?
So thankfully, I had done my research a long time ago. I mean, since I was in university, I knew I wanted to get an MBA. I probably had a short list of about 4 schools I was considering at the time. When I revised that list, looking at it this summer, I essentially narrowed it down to essentially 2 schools with a third option in case I didn't get into my top 2 schools. INSEAD to me was a no-brainer. It's the most global school out there. It's highly ranked. I've spoken to alumni and gotten incredible feedback from them throughout the years. And one of my favorite parts about INSEAD is the language requirement. I think it's going to be pretty incredible to be in a class with people that don't speak English as their first language and can speak multiple different languages and can conduct business in different continents and different countries.
Absolutely. So are you going to tell us about the other schools you applied to or thought about applying to?
Yeah, for sure. So I looked at INSEAD as my top option. London Business School was another strong contender. It has it's very similar to INSEAD in a lot of ways. The one part I wasn't sure about is whether I wanted to do, a 15 or 18 or 21 month program.
Yeah.
And I also looked at Cambridge Judge in the UK. At the end, when I looked at all 3 schools, I'd be happy with any of them. Of course, they're all wonderful schools. But INSEAD was the one I kept going back to. And I think my experience speaking with alumni from each of those schools really helped shape essentially, or it helped reaffirm the fact that INSEAD was the best fit for me.
Great. Okay, so let's rewind. You're traveling throughout Southeast Asia. You meet this guy in Myanmar that's doing amazing stuff, setting up the first telco. You're like, okay, that's kicking your butt into action. And you realize that first round deadlines are only 3 months away or so. And you hadn't taken the GMAT yet, right?
No.
So what was your plan? I mean, that's really intimidating because, you only have a couple months. You probably want to apply round 1, but you're thinking, oh, I need to get a good GMAT score, especially to get into the schools you're thinking about.
Yeah, totally. So I knew for INSEAD, absolutely, I needed to apply round 1. Not because your odds are better. It's just I want to put my best foot forward for my top school. So initially, when I was looking at applying, I didn't know how long it would take me to study for the GMAT. So I initially thought about applying, I guess, this March coming up into their the class I would graduate in December. So I said, worst comes to worst, I have no problems applying in March. It would be round one for their January intake, and I wouldn't have any issues with that. But I thought, if I could apply in September, that would be a best case scenario for me. I think I was just very anxious to go to business school. And I think, yeah, like you were saying, that travel experience really made it top of mind and created a sense of urgency for it. So the first thing I did when I decided, I guess in July, that I wanted to apply to business school was get a bunch of books to study for the GMAT and seriously commit to it. So I didn't socialize at all over the summer. Yeah, it was kind of funny because I was gone backpacking. I get back, my friends are very excited to see me. And then 2 weeks after I'm back, I say, well, I'm going to be studying like 30 hours a week for the GMAT. So maybe we can chat in like September, depending on how it goes. So it was a very intense time, and my friends are awesome and they totally understand, and they've been here with me for every milestone throughout the process. But yeah, honestly, it took 30 hours a week of studying, and I was lucky enough to get a good enough score my first time writing it. So I wrote my GMAT, I think it was right at the end of August. I think it was like August 25th or 26th. And then Insead deadline for round one was September 21st. And I didn't have too much time to actually start essay writing while studying for the GMAT. The most I got done during the time I was studying for the GMAT was just mostly come up with some ideas on what I wanted to write about. And then the moment I would write the GMAT and get a good enough score, I would just get down to writing and writing those essays. So that was really tough and that was very stressful. But I think the most stressful piece was probably getting my recommendations into place. So, I got Insead asked for 2 recommendation, and you have the option of having a third, like a third optional letter. So, it's kind of awkward going back to my past employer who I just left to go to the startup and said, hey, things are going great at the startup. I went traveling and now I have this crazy idea that I want to do my MBA. So those were very interesting chats, but I was lucky enough to get my 2 recommenders from TELUS. And then I actually told my current boss at Ecobee a month after I started that I was thinking of business school. And yeah, so I thought he'd be like mortified. But the moment I told him about it, he said, do you want me to write a letter? And I know that I hadn't worked with him a ton, but if I can submit a third letter, why not? So he was kind enough to write me a letter of recommendation as well.
And did you have a number of tough conversations with your 2 recommenders from TELUS, or do you have any tips to give our listeners there in terms of how you approached past employers that you've left?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I've always had a really great relationship with these 2 recommenders, and they've been mentors, and they are still mentors for me now. So they're very invested in my success and my happiness and that I achieve all the great things I want to achieve. But the biggest piece is giving them context and helping them understand why you're making the decisions that you're making. So you can't really just go to a past employer and say, hey, I'm all of a sudden thinking of doing an MBA. You kind of have to tell that story. I told them that story about going to Myanmar and experiencing what I experienced, and to give them context on why I wanted to go to Insead particularly, and what was the career shift I wanted to make. I think they were surprised on the timing, given I had just made a career move, and it's probably a big no-no to just start a job and then start applying for your MBA. But I think ultimately, that's what went right in this scenario, is really giving them the context, and ultimately, if you're asking the right people, they'll understand and they'll support you. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And let me ask you about the GMAT. Like, where are your most recommended resources to best prepare you to perform well there?
I'm sure there are, a multitude of resources out there. I didn't have time to do a lot of shopping around, so I looked at reviews online and I bought the whole suite of Manhattan books. So I went through every single one of those books. No matter if I think I'm strong in math or verbal, I just went through every single book and did the practice questions that way. So Manhattan was good just to kind of remember all of the stuff that I learned in high school and university. I think that the biggest thing for your GMAT is writing as many practice tests as possible. So I wrote a bunch of the Manhattan ones, but you also have to diversify that. So I think The Economist has a pretty good mock test that you can do online. So I did that one. And then I bought a bunch of the ones from the official guide. essentially, yeah, just write as many tests as possible from many different publishers, and I think it'll give you a good idea as to what score you can kind of anticipate.
Yeah, they've done studies. Actually, GMAT has actually done studies on GMAT scorers who've, scored higher than 700. And they said something like the average study time for those test takers was more than 100 hours. So,
yeah,
which is pretty
I'm
insane.
Not surprised.
And it sounds like you did that over a month. If you were studying 30 hours a week for the GMAT, I don't know how you didn't go crazy and poke your eyes out with bicycle spokes or something. That's a lot.
Yeah,
that's a lot of time to be studying for the GMAT. You must be dreaming about the GMAT.
Yeah, and honestly, that 6-week period of GMAT studying felt like months. Like it felt like 6 months had gone by. So it was quite painful. And literally every day after work for several hours, I would go to the library or go to a coffee shop. But yeah, I'm so glad it's over.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how I could do that again.
Yeah. I mean, it's, thankfully you scored well. I'll tell our listeners you scored a 720, which is a really solid score, and put you in a good position to apply to INSEAD. But I do agree with you that I think the key is just taking the test and getting used to the timing of it and the rhythm of it, kind of having this internal time clock in your head. Okay, I've spent probably enough time on this question. It's time to move on. And I think you can agree. Yeah, I think you can only do that through just practicing. So great advice there. So you've decided on INSEAD, you've taken that GMAT, you've gotten that out of the way. You only have a couple weeks left now to prepare the rest of your application. I'm sorry, you already got your recommenders as well. We've talked on this show about what INSEAD is looking for. For those of you who are interested, I highly recommend episode number 13, which is when I interviewed the former admissions director of INSEAD, Carolyn Diarte Edwards. Go check that episode out. But I'm curious, Massine, okay, first maybe you could tell us what were your post-MBA goals?
Sure. So I think, and I thought this would be a huge no-no, but they weren't as clearly defined as other examples that I saw out there. So the way I would describe my post-MBA goals or my long-term MBA, post-MBA goals, were around connecting my skill set around technology and business with social impact. So the example, I actually told that exact story in one of my essays at INSEAD was that experience in Myanmar and how I was very inspired by it. And then I unpacked that by saying I wasn't looking for something very literal. Like I wasn't looking to start launching wireless networks in third world countries,
right,
per se. But I was looking at taking the skill set that I have, going to a place that needs help and making an impact. So using technology to make an impact on others. So those are my long-term goals, and I think they can be interpreted in many different ways. I could maybe end up working in consulting. I could work for the UN on a project that aligns with my goals, but I left them pretty broad. But I relied on those stories and that passion to kind of shine through in the essays.
Yeah, and I mean, were you ever challenged on that in terms of, what do you want to do right after school? Did anyone ask you, do you have any companies in mind or, specifically any industries in mind there?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think you have to be prepared, especially while I was connecting with a bunch of INSEAD alumni. They're curious to want to know what you want to do after, because the big reason why people choose certain schools is some of the amazing recruitment opportunities that you find there. So Palantir is a company that I named that I would be interested in. They have a lot of projects all over the world, primarily in the US, probably, but they do have a lot of projects in third world countries that are, very technology and data visualization related. So I mentioned that one as a good example. I thought it was risky, especially given the fact that they don't recruit out of INSEAD, but it's a lofty goal. Consulting is never a bad option, especially in the short term. It helps you build that skill set that you can later then go to, a third world country or a developing country and make an impact. So I always kind of refer to those two as, potential outcomes of my MBA.
Yeah. I mean, interesting. And how much space did you give, or how many words did you roughly use for all the job essays? Because INSEAD asks about 4 job essays and they just say short answers. They don't specify how many words. What did you decide to do there?
So I wrote a lot. So I think the final word count on all of the essays, so the job description essays and the motivation essays, probably like 3,500 words. So I didn't really keep it short.
Yeah, that's long.
I didn't want to ramble. Yeah, it was very long. I didn't want to ramble, but I wanted to make sure I got my point across. And at first, like you were saying earlier, applying to INSEAD is pretty intimidating in the sense that they have a ton of essays. They ask for a lot of information. But looking back, I think it's way easier to go through the INSEAD application process than a school like Stanford, which they only ask for one question. I think with INSEAD, I got the real estate to tell my story and to talk about all these different things that I've experienced and what my goals are, etc. And my rule of thumb was as long as I didn't repeat myself and as long as each sentence that I wrote was valuable, I'm going to keep it in.
Yeah. So did you have other people read your essays?
Yes, I definitely did. And I think that's how I was so successful with the essay part. I think the essay part of my application was probably the strongest. And that's because I showed my essays to anyone who would want to read them. So, if I look at my computer today, it's like I have iteration after iteration after iteration of these essays for each of the people that read them. It's insane. And I think if someone was a fly on the wall and watched me go through this process, they would have probably thought I was crazy and that, every night I'd be on the phone with a new friend and reviewing their edits, getting their feedback and implementing them. I was literally just living and breathing those essays for like a month straight. But I think, getting the feedback from people that know you very well was crucial. And one of the biggest things that I wanted to get across is I wanted to tell my story. I wanted to talk about my past and my experiences and my goals. But the entire time, I wanted to make sure I was coming off as humble and that I felt, So I think humble was the biggest thing I wanted to come across. It's very easy to come off as very cocky and arrogant in those essays, especially when you're supposed to talk about your accomplishments and supposed to talk about what makes you different. But at the end of the day, I wanted to seem appreciative of everything that I have and humble. And so that was my goal. And I think it took a lot of editing and a lot of efforts to kind of make sure that those essays came off as, the way I wanted them to come off.
Yeah. Well, let me just, push you a little further there. One of the essays was about a motivation essay is about talking about an achievement which you're most proud of and, explain why, or a situation in which you failed. Would you mind sharing those with our listeners? Like what you chose to write about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I went the non-conventional route there. I try to interconnect those two stories together. So kind of talk about my biggest failure and then how it led to my proudest accomplishment. So failure-wise, I talked about a not-for-profit I started when I was in university. And as a result of maybe micromanaging a bit too much and overcommitting, it ultimately failed. It only lasted, the year that I was there in my fourth year of university. And I talked about, everything that was kind of going through my mind during that last year of school. So it kind of led to my proudest accomplishment in the sense that I talked about being like finally coming out. So I'm gay.
Wow. Yeah.
All your listeners, you now know. So I essentially talked about my coming out story, and I came out shortly after going through that experience because at the same time that I'm trying to start this not-for-profit, I was in my first relationship essentially, and I felt the need to keep it secret and not tell others about it. And reflecting on that situation, it made me realize that, there is no reason why I shouldn't share that part of myself with others, and that I'm probably not giving my friends and my family members enough credit. So I failed with this not-for-profit idea, poorly executed, but it led to my proudest accomplishment. Not necessarily my biggest accomplishment, but when I look back on my life and say, you know what, I'm very proud of what I did then. It was hard, it was difficult, but it happened. So I think most candidates, from what I've heard, write about a professional accomplishment or an academic accomplishment when it comes to what you're most proud of. But again, going back to being humble, I didn't want to talk about getting a promotion or being a top performer or launching a product and et cetera. I think those are all great things. And I'm sure I covered them well enough in my resume and my job description essays.
Right.
But I wanted to kind of show whoever's reading my application that being proud of an accomplishment is a lot more than just those professional things. It's those things that really build you as a person.
No, absolutely. And I mean, did you get all positive feedback on this essay when you were sharing it with so many people? Or were there some people who said, ooh, that could be a slightly controversial topic to discuss in your application?
Yeah, no, I think I got mixed feedback. I would say it was probably about 50-50. Some friends wanted me to go for it and to write it down. Some others said, okay, well, you might want to focus on something more professional. It seems like that's what they're looking for with the question. And I mean, I live in North America. I'm very lucky to be out and to hold someone's hand in public, etc. But you never really know who's going to be reading your essay.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I mean, INSEAD has, a good LGBT community, and they have a student club called OutSead. And I have no concerns with going to INSEAD, but again, you never know who's reading it. So it always is a risk whenever you want to come out and say you're gay. So historically, when I interview for a new job, I don't make it apparent that I'm gay, just in case. Yeah. You never know who's sitting across from you. So I think I just decided to go all in, take that risk, polish up that essay. And I think interconnecting it with my biggest failure was a good idea. And it kind of made that story kind of flow really nicely. Because otherwise you would almost be writing two essays and just copying and like essentially having them all in the same block, which felt very odd for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what you said about, showing that you're proud of something outside of an academic or professional accomplishment and something intensely personal. I mean, I think that's a really good strategy and very brave of you to use that as one of the essays. And maybe that's what even struck a chord, So that's a really cool example. I also wanted to ask you about what you discussed in the other essay, which is talking about, let's see here, like your extra professional activities, things you've been involved in outside of work. Because I know, looking at your resume, you're doing some really interesting stuff. Cycling instructor, scrum master, scuba diver. How did you present all these things?
Yeah, that was a tough one because it was a shorter essay as well. I think from what I remember, it was like something like 300 words, and there's a lot you can talk about. And I think on the extracurricular piece, I'm probably a little bit short compared to other candidates. I think there's probably some amazing candidates that have been on boards of, large organizations, NGOs, or maybe they've traveled abroad to volunteer. So I knew I had, a little bit less to work with. But that being said, I do have a life outside of work, and I try to do a lot of things outside of work, like, scuba dive and travel and cycle. But again, I think it was about how I framed all of those extracurriculars and tie them around a theme. And my theme was around motivating others and kind of giving back. So I kind of talked about how, when I was younger, I was a bit overweight. I wasn't the most physically active kid in the playground, but I overcame that growing up. So after high school, I worked hard, I ran, and I lost a bunch of weight. And my way of giving back was, so I eventually became a cycling and indoor cycling instructor. And I know what it's like to try to lose weight. It's difficult. It takes a lot of effort. You want to give up. But that was my way of kind of coaching people through that. And not necessarily being a weight loss coach, but sitting in a class and knowing what to say to certain individuals to kind of get them to push themselves as hard as they can, as hard as it can work. So I talked about teaching cycling class. I talked about being this really unfit person like 6 or 7 years ago, and then now running marathons and teaching the spin class. And then that theme kind of carried over academically as well. So when I was in university, I was lucky enough to be a teaching assistant while in undergrad. So I talked about that and helping and mentoring younger students to achieve their best potential academically. So that was the theme I kind of went with, was giving back, helping others, both I'm giving examples of fitness-related things as well as academically related things.
I think that's so smart to tie, all your varied interests together with a theme. Let's talk about those video questions. So INSEAD now requires applicants to answer these 4 video questions where you have 45 seconds to prepare and then a minute to answer them. Talking to you on this podcast, you seem like a very natural very articulate person, but how did you go about preparing for these video questions? And, did you have any hiccups along the way? What was your experience there?
So I was probably the most, reading all the requirements for INSEAD, I thought the video piece would just be a piece of cake. There's a ton of essays or there's a GMAT I have to go through. I was like, oh, the video piece is going to be super easy. So the way I decided to prepare was I came up with a list of questions that are typically asked, gave them to friends, and I got them to time me answering those questions. So I actually even just got on Skype with a friend. He would ask a random question. We would wait 30 seconds and I'd answer it in a minute. But it was so strange. I was like a robot on those videos. Like when I was talking with my friends, oh my God, they were shocked because, naturally I can talk to people and it's fine. But then when the camera turned on, I was like this robot and it was over structured and I was like smiling weird. So I'm sure my friend's going to be listening to this podcast and die laughing because he has some very good examples of how terribly I answered some questions. Like I would just kind of ramble, but I guess like I just try to relax as much as possible. I think ultimately, I don't think they're reading too much into these video questions. Like you're saying, they just want to get a sense of how you communicate with others. Sorry.
Yeah.
And whether you can answer certain questions on the fly that you should be able to answer. What are your goals? Why are you doing an MBA? Why INSEAD? Strengths, weaknesses, and then like behavioral situational questions. So, I don't think I'm sure there are people who just nail these video interviews, but I think at the end of the day, as long as you do okay, you'll be fine. I think your essays are more important and your alumni interviews are a lot more important.
Yeah. How many times did you practice this? Like to a point where you felt you were less robotic?
So again, I think because my entire process was so rushed, I wish I had a lot more time, but I submitted my application early just so I have a bit of more time with the video. So I probably practiced like 4 days.
Yeah.
Practiced at lunch with one of my coworkers. After work, I would get on Skype with a friend and I would just, did it over 4 days.
Yeah.
Got comfortable with answering those questions. And I just kind of went into it and relaxed my shoulders, took a deep breath, smiled, and just didn't try to overthink it. I think I was mostly just overthinking the entire thing.
Right. Yeah, no, as a host of a podcast, trust me, you never realize how you sound until you record yourself. So, I think your technique is really smart too, in that you have friends to give you feedback as well. It's not just in your own head, recording your answers and then thinking, oh, I sound robotic. I think it's good to get that outside feedback, especially from people who know you well and can say, hey man, loosen up, or, just whatever it is they tell you to relax you. I think that's a really smart way of preparing. Did any of the questions catch you off guard, or were the questions pretty close to what you were expecting?
I think one of the questions was a bit, I didn't really expect it. So I think it was almost like a scenario. I think it's something along the lines of, if you started your own company, what would be 3 core values of that company? So I didn't really anticipate that. I thought
it's a great question. I like that question.
It is, yeah.
It's a good one.
So I had to, So I kind of thought about what was important to me, and then, maybe use some values of past organizations I worked with that resonated with me, and just, I came up with 3 values, gave it, reasons why, and that was good.
Can you actually see like a ticking clock, like a little second hand that's going around, the clock face, and you're like, okay, I just covered my first company. That's 20 seconds. Now I have 40 seconds to cover these other companies. What is that like? Well, I guess they give you an interface to practice with, right?
Yeah, and the interface to practice with is almost identical to the actual experience.
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
So the way it works is, I think they record a lot of INSEAD staff I think within admissions and marketing, and they ask the question and you see them on video asking the question. These are all pre-recorded. So that video will go on. They'll ask the question. It's also written down at the bottom. Then I think there's a timer. I forget if it was 30 seconds or 45 seconds that you have to kind of think about what you're going to say. And then when the timer starts, I don't remember, but I think it's like on the top right corner, you see kind of like a clock winding down.
Jeez.
And then you always find yourself just talking a little bit faster near the end because you're trying to close off.
Yeah. So I was just saying, that's why I want to go to Insead, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Like 5 seconds. So you don't want to
One thing I noticed actually is you can end the video early. So instead of having like a weird 10-second pause at the end where you're just like staring at the screen and smiling, I discovered that like when I was actually recording my video that you could actually just as soon as you're done talking, you can end the video rather than looking like a weirdo.
Well, I also want to move on and talk about your interviews because I know they're a really important part of the Insead application process. But let me first ask one more question going back to the beginning of the show. When you were reaching out to your recommenders, how much did you prepare for them in terms of, okay, this is what I will present as my career goals. These are the themes I'm going to be focused on. All the things you've mentioned during this show, were those clear to you when you approached them? I'm just wondering how you prepped them to write strong recommendations.
So in an ideal world, I would have given them my essays. And I met with them in person a couple times. I would have given them my essays and then kind of given them ideas on the questions they're going to be answering about myself.
That's right.
But I obviously didn't have that scenario. I didn't have that situation. So I don't think they saw my essays until actually after I applied because I was so short on time. So like you said, I just kind of wrote down bullet points in terms of what my long-term goals are. But I also provided them with, examples of accomplishments at TELUS so that it'd be a lot easier for them to kind of write those letters. So I think the most important thing in those letters is just to come out with very specific examples on how I'm demonstrating certain strengths or even weaknesses. Because it's really easy to write a letter and say, oh, Massine's so great and he's very organized and he communicates well. But I think ultimately what they're looking for is just, evidence of how your past experience demonstrates that, you are who you are and that it aligns with what you said your own strengths were and what you said your own weaknesses were. I think the biggest thing I was focused on is making sure that the way I described myself in my essays was consistent with how my recommenders were describing me. We absolutely did not use like the same strengths, of course, or anything like that. But for example, if I said in my essay that I was disorganized and that was my biggest weakness, there's no way one of my recommenders should say I'm organized. It's like one of those things, or vice versa with strengths and weaknesses. I think that's the biggest thing you need to be focused on. Otherwise, it'll show that your application was maybe rushed or maybe your recommender doesn't know you so well, etc.
Or just shows maybe not that your recommender doesn't know you so well, but your self-awareness is not strong.
Exactly.
Right? And the recommenders, it's always a tricky part of the process, but I think you're right. Like specific evidence of traits, of qualities, of values, and also this is something you can't really control, but the tone. So you can control in terms of picking people that will be super pumped to support you and back you up. But I think that's what really comes across, at least in the great recommendations I've read, like that specific concrete detail backed up with, this true excitement and authentic support of the candidate. And it's pretty easy for admissions readers to tell, after going through a lot of those recommendations. But okay, in terms of the alumni interviews, so who interviewed you? How did you prepare for those?
Great question. So I think in terms of who, I don't remember their names off the top of my head. The first one had been out of school for probably about 10 or maybe 15 years. So he was a little bit older, but I think he's, maybe about 40 years old. So not super old, but
hey, 40 isn't that old. Okay, man. Back up.
No, it's super young.
There you go.
So he was in finance. So not very related to my work experience, but he just invited me over to his office, and then we just kind of chatted for 30 minutes. It was pretty short. He just wanted to know, why I wanted to go to INSEAD. Have I thought about what classes I wanted to go to, what I want to do right after? And then we both talked about traveling, and he talked about how his experience went. So it was very conversational, very relaxed, and I found actually most of the talking was probably done by him, and so it was pretty relaxed, and I thought it went well. He never really gave me a sense of how well I did, so I thought we had a great chat, so I just kind of assumed they went well. The other interview was with an INSEAD grad that's been out of school for I think 4 or 5 years, and she worked in banking as well, but had a background in law. So we met at a coffee shop downtown. Again, it was pretty short. I think it was 30 minutes as well. And that one, I think we got along right away. We talked about, why she wanted to go to INSEAD and why I want to go to INSEAD, and do I want to do a campus exchange, etc. And at the end, she told me that, I had nothing to worry about, and that, she was going to submit her assessment that night, but, that I left a good impression, essentially.
Yeah.
And then I just waited a while. Thankfully, or not thankfully, my interviews were actually like a couple days after I heard I got the interview.
That's pretty quick. Yeah.
It was. Yeah. I emailed them right away just to make sure I gave them enough time to book something in. And they both replied and wanted to do something in the same week. So I had a while to wait for the final offer.
I mean,
sorry, to answer the second part of your question on how I prepared, that was probably the step I prepared the least for. I just reread my essays throughout the entire process, even while I was studying for the GMAT and writing essays. I met with as many alumni as I could. So I met with a bunch of alumni in Toronto. I actually forgot to say this, but I actually went to Fontainebleau in early September, right after I wrote the GMAT, to go visit the campus. So I got to meet a couple professors, some current students, and even some other students thinking of applying. So I think that gave me a really good sense of the school culture and what alumni typically value about the school, and et cetera. I'd done a ton of research on the school, so I think I was pretty confident with chatting about why INSEAD and what I'm most excited for, et cetera.
I mean, how many students and alumni do you think you spoke to during this whole process? Just so our listeners have an idea.
A ton. I think probably close
what's a ton? 20. Oh.
20. Yeah. So when I finally got the offer, it was a lot of people to text or send a message on LinkedIn or email to let them know how it went. But I think that was probably that's probably the best thing you can do when you're applying to a school, because it'll show in your essays that you know what you're talking about, you know why you want to go there, and then your interviews will go very well, especially if you've got a sense of what the culture is and what they value most about the school.
I mean, were all these 20 alumni part of your network and part of that school visit, or did you have to reach out blindly, in a sense, to some alumni?
I'd say there's probably about 5 that I knew through friends or that I've met in the past that I was able to reach out with pretty easily. The others, I essentially just went on LinkedIn and looked at recent INSEAD grads that were in the Toronto area, and I just sent them a blind LinkedIn message and said, "Hey, I'm applying for round 1. I'm doing a lot of research on the school, and I really want to meet students, like Canadian students that went to INSEAD, and kind of understand your motivations and get feedback from you." And I was actually, I think I mentioned this earlier in the show, it helped prioritize INSEAD as my number 1 school and only apply to INSEAD for round 1. And that was like, I did the same thing for other schools that I was looking into, like LBS. And I don't know, maybe it's just my sample size was too small, but the INSEAD grads always replied. They were super friendly. They were excited to share their experience. And that just gave me a really good vibe for the school. And it made me feel like I belonged.
Yeah, no, that is such a good tip. I mean, well, it's funny because you basically cyber-stalked INSEAD alums through LinkedIn, but that's what you have to do. Yeah. But that's what you have to do. And I think that response rate is actually a good way to gauge, kind of how excited people are about their school too, though, So I think that's a good method. Wow, 15 alumni. So that you didn't really know. That's crazy. You must feel like you knew the experience so well already before submitting your application and going through all the steps. I mean, just talking to 15, 20 people about their experience, that's really amazing preparation, actually.
Yeah, and INSEAD has an amazing student blog online, and they post quite frequently. So I think reading the content there also helps you prep in a way. So, just in case you live in a city that maybe doesn't have a ton of INSEAD alumni, you can read the blog and get honest opinions from students. The other thing too is don't be limited to just the city you live in. So I looked at OutSead, the LGBT group of INSEAD, and I messaged one of the members and said, "Hey, I know you're in Singapore. I'm in Toronto, but I see you're originally Canadian. Do you want to Skype and chat about your experience at INSEAD?" And again, more than happy to respond. And we Skyped for an hour. And so that was really cool, talking to a current student, also LGBT.
Yeah.
And hearing about his great experience and hearing about, his recruitment experience, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I think that's such great advice. And I have to ask you because, you're a listener to the show, and you mentioned in your notes before, in our exchange before recording this, that how did you use the Touch MBA podcast or other podcasts, to help you prepare your application?
Yeah. Great question. So the same way I stalked INSEAD, I probably stalked your podcast just as much. So you have hundreds of episodes. I probably listened to as many that would apply to me as possible. So I bike to work typically. I mean, it's too cold right now, but throughout the summer and the fall, I would bike to work. And every day I would listen to your podcasts. And some of them that I really enjoyed, I would actually listen over and over and over again. And I think you actually mentioned one that I've probably listened to 10 times. That's episode 13 with Carolyn.
Yeah.
So, you interview some really great guests, either students or admissions directors that have some amazing insights. And I was able to apply those directly, how to prep your recommenders, or you had a lot of really good ones on essay writing and how to kind of come up with those ideas and how to tell a story. Because I think a strong essay for your application isn't just about getting the facts on the page. It's about kind of threading a story together. And I forget who was the guest. It was one of your good friends, but they talked about starting with a story and earning the trust of the reader. And then you can start lecturing the reader. So you kind of tell them a story related to whatever theme you're talking about. And then eventually you kind of get to your point, and you have those facts at the end that you want to get to.
No, that's, first of all, if you could see my face when you said you listened to some of my podcasts over and over, you'd probably be scared. I was oh no, gosh, I'm poor guy, listening to my voice over and over. But no, I really appreciate that. That's always great to hear. That episode that you mentioned is actually with, my best friend from college. That's John Kaya Hello. That's episode 32. So those of you could go back and listen to that episode. But it sounds like despite your short time frame, you pulled out all the stops. You dedicated yourself to the GMAT. You got good recommenders. You spoke with 20 alumni. You visited the campus. You got your essays reviewed by multiple friends. You practiced your video questions with multiple friends. It sounds like you have a really good network around you to help you out, or you really twisted some arms. But either way, it sounds like, you really, gave this process everything you had and basically did everything you could. Do you have any last advice or encouragement for listeners who, used to be like you in your shoes, thinking about top programs and how to get started and what to do, maybe listening to this show? I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I think the biggest advice I would give is, I think if you want something bad enough, it will happen. And it all happens through hard work and dedication. I mean, I don't think I would have gotten in INSEAD if I didn't pull out all the stops. I don't think I would have gotten in if I didn't study 30 hours a week for the GMAT. I didn't reach out to all these alumni. I didn't go visit the campus. I didn't read as much as I read online. I think if you're really passionate about something, it will be easy to do those things. It's painful in the moment, but at the end of the day, if you're thinking about that goal and you're working towards that goal, it'll motivate you to kind of push through and make it happen. So I'd say that, yeah, that's my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to say, hard to do, right? Putting in all that work. But Massine, while I have you here, I want to get a promise from you that I can get you on the show again to talk about maybe, how your INSEAD experience is going, or maybe it's after you graduate from INSEAD, and just to hear, about your experience in the program and what you thought of it and what you learned. Because I think it's always good to kind of complete that journey. So could I get you on a second time?
Absolutely. I think it's the least I could do.
See, public commitment. This is what I got to do.
Yeah.
Get it on the show.
I can't
you
back
said
out
it.
now.
You can't back out now. Oh, that's so crafty of me. But no, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. And I think just living through all the work and that experience of yours, in an hour of this talk, I think will help a lot of applicants realize, how they can best prepare and go about submitting great applications. So thank you so much for coming on the show and, sharing your insights. You'll get started at INSEAD in this September, correct?
That's
September
right.
2018. So we wish you all the best of luck there. And can't wait to see, what exciting things you end up doing in the development space.
Thank you very much. And if anyone listening to this show needs to reach out to either an INSEAD alum or current student by September, I'm again more than happy to chat the same way all these amazing people were happy to chat with me.
So yeah, we'll have Massine create a post on our ambassadors forum. That's at ambassadors.touchmba.com. All you need to do is just search for Massine, that's Massine, or INSEAD, and he'll post will pop up so you can connect with him and ask him your questions. Thank you so much, Massine.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your number one school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.